I'd like to get some more questions in, and we'll go to Alistair Laurie.
My question's to Senator Brandis. Last Tuesday, you announced that the Coalition would block any LGBTI anti-discrimination bill that did not allow religious aged care service providers to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. This is despite the fact that these agencies themselves do not believe they need this exception. You seem to be putting a theoretical religious freedom above practical protections. Why don't you believe that older lesbians, gay men, bisexuals and transgender Australians, people who have grown up when their love was criminalised, who lost friends and lovers to HIV and AIDS, have the right to grow old in dignity and respect that they deserve?
It's a very important question that you ask, and let me explain what the opposition's position is. But there was one statement in your question which wasn't quite right. You said that the religious institutions, the churches, didn't themselves want the exemption so far as concerned aged care facilities. That's not right. Some said they didn't want it. Most said they did. So don't be misled by a misleading statement by the Attorney-General. On the broader issue, when the bill, the sex discrimination bill, was introduced into the Parliament, I took a submission to the Shadow Cabinet and to our party room, which was, I think without a dissenting voice, endorsed that we should support it. And the reason we support it is because it's actually the policy we took to the 2010 election, that the provisions of the Sex Discrimination Act should extend to sexuality as a protected attribute. The government knew that they had the opposition on board with this. In fact, the government's measure was itself taken from the opposition's report on the broader human rights and anti-discrimination bill, the bill that was abandoned by the government earlier this year because it was acknowledged to have gone way too far. So we had, on this very tricky and important issue of discrimination against gay people, we had bipartisanship and unanimity. And then into the middle of this harmonious bipartisan moment, the Labor Party, out of the blue, threw in an amendment, never anticipated, never expected, that would have caused the religious exemption issue to come into play. Now, if you want to build a consensus around this issue, that gay people should be protected from discrimination by the Sex Discrimination Act, then you would not have done that. And the Labor Party, on all other grounds, in all other arenas, has said that it will respect the religious exemption. I'm cynical about why the Labor Party did that, knowing that by introducing the religious exemption, it would make it impossible for that bipartisanship to continue.
George Brandis, the questioner's got his hand up, so we'll go back to you.
I'd just like to pick up a point that you seem to be making. In Senator Humphrey's dissenting report to the Sex Discrimination Senate inquiry, the two organisations that he quoted justifying the call for a religious exception in that circumstance were the Australian Christian Lobby and the Catholic Women's League. Neither of them provide religious aged care services. So in that circumstance, why are we trying to impose a religious exception to the detriment of older LGBT people for those groups that don't actually run those services?
Well, I'm very familiar with that minority report because I was one of the signatories to it and I had a lot to do with drafting it. There were many more submissions to the inquiry from other churches and religious institutions than those two. So don't infer that because those two were mentioned as a for example, those were the only ones, because they weren't.
Okay, George, I'd like to hear other people on this subject. Anne Summers?
I'm afraid I don't know much about the legislation. I mean, I just obviously would support the principle that that LGBT people should be able to go to retirement homes and nursing homes free from any form of discrimination, which I take to be the central point. And I know that, one of the problems with homes that are run by some religions is that they have been discriminatory in the past, and I imagine what we're trying to avoid is the continuation of that discrimination, and I would support that.
Yeah, very briefly, George, before I go back to the other panellists, shouldn't anti-discrimination be universal?
No.
Why?
No.
It shouldn't.
Anti-discrimination law should not be universal because the right to fair treatment is one of several very important but sometimes inconsistent values. The right of people who practice or profess a particular religious faith to live their lives and to conduct their institutions in accordance with the precepts of their religious faith is integral to religious freedom. And religious freedom is also a fundamentally important value. And it's on principle, you're saying that religious freedom supersedes the freedom of your sexuality? Yes, I am, as a matter of fact. Yes, I am. But I'm also making a political point. We in the Liberal Party have joined with people in the Labor Party to progress this agenda for years. And those who wanted to see the Sex Discrimination Act extend to protect people on the grounds of their sexuality were furious that the Labor Party decided to throw in a curveball into this debate that deprived the country of the opportunity for unanimity on this.
OK, let's hear from the government. Matt, Thistlethwaite, did you throw a curveball in order to create a problem for the coalition supporting your legislation?
No, I think it's a bit of a cop-out for George to seek to blame the government for their position on this. The reason why we've developed that position is in response to the concerns of people such as yourself within the community. And I think in this day and age, in a secular society, the view that's been put forward by the Labor Party reflects the views of the community. That's why we've done it. I think that's good legislating, and it's a bit of a cop-out for the opposition to blame us for that.
But Matt, the legislation that you introduced into the Parliament didn't have that provision in it. The legislation that was called for by your senators didn't call for that provision. It came out of the blue after it was established that this bill had bipartisan support. Why did you do it?
It came out of consultation, George.
No, it came out of the blue.
I wasn't involved in...
No, you weren't.
I wasn't involved directly in it, but
it came out of the blue.
In my consultations with Labor Party senators, it came out of consultation.
Okay.
It came out of the views of the public.
All right, I think we'll move on. Our last question tonight.